And so that is all there. Community is all there. The sense of pulling together in the face of strife is all there. It's just also acknowledging the injustice of the oppressor and also acknowledging that this pain is real and it's bad.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. Thank you for listening. I want to just remind you all that if you're not following us on social media, please do. It's always nice to interact with you all, and I'm always posting clips from the podcast, information about our free book club that's on Zoom, and all other kinds of exciting events, and a lot of literary posts. So Instagram is at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and so is our Facebook. We have a LinkedIn, a YouTube channel where you might be watching us now. So hi, there's a video episode on YouTube. And our TikTok is actually my name. It's at dr.andrewrimby. And Patreon is where you can find all the just uncensored, no ad episodes. It's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. There's usually some kind of deal going on, and you can try it out for a few days for free if you just want to see what gets posted there. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. It means a lot. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you're following us. And I hope you all just enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm joined here with Robert W. Fieseler, who's a journalist investigating marginalized groups and a scholar who excavates forgotten histories. A journalist of the year with the NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists, and recipient of the Pulitzer Traveling Fellowship. His debut book, Tinderbox, won 7 awards, including the Edgar Award, and his reporting has appeared in Slate, Commonweal, River Teeth, among others. He graduated co-valedictorian from the Columbia
Ooh,
Journalism School
keep
and is
going.
pursuing a PhD at Tulane University. Not only that, but as a Mellon Fellow. And he was just telling me about carnival season in New Orleans, where he lives with his husband on the gayest street. So here we
Yes,
go from, you know, Jersey outside of Manhattan to New Orleans. I like
love
the
it. Happy to
connection.
be here. Love the connection. Love it.
Yeah, so I love what you're. First of all, I'm here to talk with him about American Scare, which just won a Stonewall Award. So congratulations.
Of
Um,
course. No, that's amazing. Come on. Gay
yes,
men love attention. So, like, when the American Library Association has a little committee called that gives out an award called Stonewall, and you're named an honor book, come on.
exactly.
That's just a darn dream come true.
Yeah, well, and I feel like your book, which is subtitled Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives, is so important not only for the history, but also like when we talk about your book being honored by a library association, you know, how do you weigh in right now with how libraries are just feeling with the censoring of material, especially queer
I
material?
was so overwhelmed and honored. It was a librarian from the Dayton Metro Library, actually, who was on the Rainbow Roundtable Committee that administers the Stonewall Awards that called me. And he basically like it felt like Publishers Clearinghouse, like you've won a blah blah blah. And it's like and it's like, oh my gosh, and then he was telling me about basically he handles queer materials, and I was just like, hold on, like not it you're the one that should be honored. Like queer librarians right now in this country, like administering books and basic materials, which should be protected by the First Amendment, are on the front lines of the culture war, and so many of them are in danger. Like they're harassed at work, they're followed home, they're targeted by political groups individually. So they're some of them are a lot of them are going through hell, and so for them to even to meet, to read all of the queer titles for this year, out of like a pile, pick my little baby book and say that it was worth something to them and spoke to them was overwhelming to me. And beautiful. Librarians are tough. They're tough. I
Yeah.
mean, some of them could wrestle bears probably with what they do, and they are of service. They're incredibly well read. Um, and they offer basic like they offer basic like a free for all situation like with that where anyone from the public can walk in and interact with them. And so I really admire what they do, and I really appreciate that any committee like this would take the time to really foreground and highlight queer books at a time like this.
Yeah, well, and not only librarians are on the front lines of this Trump regime, but also, Don Lemon, independent journalists, with your, you
Oh
know,
gosh.
journalistic experience and expertise. Like, what do you think of how journalists right now are, subjected to the whims of what feels like the emperor with no clothes?
Yeah, the fourth estate is barely hanging on. It was yeah, the fourth estate is like in like political theory terms is supposed to be the fourth form of government that looks over the other three, the executive, legislative, and judicial branch on behalf of the people. The job of journalists in the fourth estate is to inform the public and hold power to account. And journalism has been decimated by the digital revolution, by social media, et cetera, by now AI news. And then on top of that, what skeletal form that it exists in now is being politically attacked. And with individual journalists exercising First Amendment rights in service of the country, actually, in service of informing the public, are being arrested, um, jailed. It's incredibly scary. It's reminiscent of other times and other societies that decided, when a society goes bad, they often go after the truth tellers first.
Hmm.
They go after the individuals that are not offering the kind of redacted hagiographic narrative that the regime wants. And so it's scary. It's happening now to journalists like Don Lemon and others. I mean, it's been happening. There are journalistic organizations for the past several decades that account for the number of journalists killed in various countries year to year during international coverage. It's actually quite chilling when you look at it. And then it goes all the way back to the 1950s and before. In the midst of the Red Scare, journalists would be personally targeted, often opportunistically. They would go after. They would look for. They would surveil a person. Agents of state would a journalist seek a personal weakness out and then you exploit that weakness to destroy them reputationally and get them fired. So in my book, the direct tie would be to Don Lemon would be there was a journalist who covered the subject of my book, which was the Florida Johns Committee or the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee, which was this largely forgotten Red Scare cabal in Florida that for 9 years held residents of the state of Florida ransom to this extrajudicial roving inquest body that had its day the power to call and declare anyone it wanted to a communist, a pervert, a subversive, an enemy of the people. And there was a journalist who covered this group in its 9 years of existence from 1956 to 1965 named Robert Delaney for various publications, but eventually for the Orlando Sentinel. And he got in their craw. He was the only one that was doing beat coverage, covering their mistakes and basically their violations of civil rights and liberties and judicial procedure, et cetera. Basically proving that that the Johns Committee, whatever they were doing in the Red Scare, Florida, was illegal. And at the end, so when the Johns Committee got sick of him, they spun around, figured out that the guy was a recovering alcoholic, used his participation in AA to figure out a way to lure him into a room with a lone woman, then arrested him and accused him of, in the South, this is laughable to charge, conspiracy to commit adultery. I'm sorry, a white man in the South being charged with adultery. I mean, do you understand sexual practices in this region? I mean, it's just and he was convicted, not of cheating on his wife. No, they couldn't prove this. There was a hung jury. They couldn't handle it. He was conspiring. He was planning to cheat on us. And it turns out the woman that the Johns Committee got him in a random hotel room with, where she claimed that she wanted alcohol AA counseling, and he was her sponsor. The woman they got him was a paid mole who was basically a lesbian bartender under charges from Pensacola, and they knew this, and the jury knew this, and they still convicted this journalist who'd been covering them under these completely trumped up, made up charges, and the guy lost his job at the Orlando Sentinel, and his wife divorced him. I mean, like he suffered. This is what can happen to journalists, to individuals in our country who dare to speak the truth, not the realm of alternate facts, whatever you're talking about, but just coverage. What you said here, what you did to this person there, and this person is destroyed. So often, when systems in this country become regimes, they go after the message deliverer, the truth teller, and journalists everywhere are feeling the heat. They're threatened with lawfare, lawsuits now from individuals in power holding public office. They're jailed. They're threatened with jail time. Individuals holding public offices then use their time in public office to go on social media and specifically malign you. For why? Why? Because they didn't like what you wrote. You didn't paint the version of reality that they would prefer, basically. So that's basically my little rant and my status for what's going on in the Fourth Amendment now. I won this is so it's so gay that I know this, but I won a journalism award a couple years ago for a queer history story called the Sigma Delta Chi Award. And I always wondered why. I never read these awards, but this award had this on the plaque. It said, this award is for outstanding coverage, and it said for distinguished service to the American people. And I always wondered why it said that. And then the moment Don Lemon got arrested, it really hit home for me that he's arrested in distinguished service of the American people. That is what true journalists do and offer.
Well, I had to be a few years now, but I had Catherine Corcoran on, who used to work for the AP Bureau in Mexico, and she talked all about like how journalists were disappearing. And I asked her, are there do you see parallels to what's happening in America? And this is 2 years ago, and I feel that. Do you think that this authoritarian type of silencing, this type of trying to create a chilling effect of paranoia, of not speaking out, we could look back to Kathy Griffin, what happened with her and the investigation in his first presidency, and how many, so-called liberals turned on her. And then now they're like, oh, we were so wrong. You were at the front line of these investigations, and now it's happening to so many high profile people. Do you think that they're succeeding in actually chilling or stopping journalists from speaking out?
I think the way that they are succeeding is they've created, since the 50s, since the creation of the national security apparatus post World War II, that then was perverted and harnessed by initial perpetrators of the Federal Red Scare and then the Southern Red Scares. What they said was that basically certain types of information in this country are not public and shouldn't be public because they could harm the safety of our country. And you need to just trust it. And basically we can take that out of the public realm, and basically we can redact reality for national security purposes, and you just need to believe us what you can't see because it's for your safety. It's not to protect my reputation, and it's not to cover up my crime. It's just for what you can't see. It's to protect you. And so it's created this foxes guarding the henhouse phenomenon, and it's only expanded where they're year to year since the 1950s. Through Reaganism and the Cold War, through the war on terror, now through MAGA and Trumpism, the degree and the amounts of information that are considered not should not be available for public knowledge has expanded so exponentially that now it covers basic things like you can't get in the state of Louisiana case narratives on coroners reports. You can't, I mean, like, there's certain things that just should be public knowledge that at a base level basically are either you don't get, or if you get it when you FOIA request something, it's all blacked out, and who decides what should stay and who decides what shouldn't be there? Because if two people request from entities the same document, it comes back censored in different ways. So it's basically it's created this effect where not only is information being limited to the public, and the public has come to accept actually that we don't deserve the truth anymore. I think many people believe that we should just trust whatever these entities are. They have a procedure. There must be someone overlooking it. No, it's just the person doing it. And that's created not just a chilling effect on our culture and on the spread of information, but I think a deadening effect where right now, I think American culture, the American arts are grinding to an almost standstill. You see the closure of the Kennedy Center for renovations.
Renovations, aka everyone's backed out that they don't have anything going on in the Kennedy Center, and
right.
So my interpretation is his ego is so bruised because he failed with his Kennedy Center branding. But sorry, go on.
Right. You see a guy trying to tell a joke involving Epstein at the Grammy Awards who's threatened with a lawsuit from the president. Like what? Because he didn't like the joke. You see major, like I'm talking like MacArthur Foundation grant recipient opera directors at avant-garde opera, such as like the Detroit Opera, suddenly losing grant funding randomly, having to revise what makes your having to revise and end like contracts early, and then a person has to depart. So many queer arts and literary organizations just are on basically like they've been completely depleted. They don't know what to do for programming because the grant system sort of was stacked and built on itself, where it depended at least on a little kernel of state or public money that then got expanded upon by private philanthropy. That system's erased. And so the levers of power that hinge on money, influence, and information, they've all kind of been turned off in favor of however the regime determines culture should be and should go. The NEA doesn't have writers' grants anymore. That was one of the great awards, literary awards a writer could get, was an NEA grant on your project. And I was one of the applicants last year that earlier this year that got the letter with that was grammatically incorrect, misspelled, had a random "Make Great America Great Again" reference, where it announced they were ending a program that had supported the arts and artists, emerging artists, since the 60s. And that wasn't just me. Like, this happened to NEH grants, National Endowment for the Humanities, etc. So there's been basically widespread destruction to whatever was left of culture in the commons, where now the rest of us are figuring out what to do next. What do we do next? It's not like the spirit to create is gone. But the money and resources that had been put behind feeding artists, literally housing them, making sure that they would be okay, so that they can create the work, has evaporated, and the market is not going to solve and feed them, like, and figure it out.
Yeah.
And so that's the response. We live in a redaction nation where somehow they've figured out by playing with levers and playing with financial levers that they can do away with artists and actually redact culture at will, in addition to information.
Yeah, well, and as a literary scholar, it reminds me of how during such intense, turbulent times, like I think of the Dark Ages, I think of any kind of like how Enlightenment comes about, how even the Civil War period is also when right after there's like a underbelly with that rubble of just culture exploding and
Oh,
expanding
certainly.
because, right, you have to create new forms of
Sure.
arts and culture. Like, what are you seeing, even parallels to what you
Right.
have looked at with the lavender scare and how did these artists try to, or journalists, specifically the queer
Yeah.
community, how did they form their own organizations under the scrutiny of being accused of communist,
Sure.
being a communist? Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episodes, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tukolsky, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading. It may be freezing here in the Northeast, but when I received my copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review, it warmed me up instantly. Their new issue is all about kink culture. Let me explain a little. I'm going to read what Jeremy C. Fox, the managing editor, has to say about this issue. He says this issue marks a bit of a departure for the Gay and Lesbian Review as we crack open the bedroom door to explore the practices and paraphilias that interest or obsess some LGBT people and the roots of their appeal. Several feature articles delve deeply into why certain kinks turn some of us on, and whether we can discern historical and aesthetic rationales behind these fixations. This magazine features articles such as The Power of the Foot. Oh, yeah, they're going there with foot kinks. Maplethorpe's Gift to America, Reclaiming the Sacred Dungeon. Tumblr was a gateway to kink, and Cruising with Boyd McDonnell. You definitely want to get your hands on the kink issue here. I have an exclusive promo code that those at the Gay and Lesbian Review have granted to you all. It is ITBR Choice. Enter it when you check out on the glreview.org. and you will get a free issue of the magazine. I hope you all enjoy your reading, and it'll definitely keep you nice and cozy. Yeah.
A lot of that, a lot of direct work sprang from the McCarthy-esque Johns Committee persecutions in Florida. One of the most famous being Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. But then you would have the nascent collective memory of state oppression that then carried into the development of the early years of gay literature, the Violet Quill, etc. And then you had like members of the Violet Quill that were very connected. So that was Edmund White, Andrew Holleran, Felice Bacano, all these like really great literary names who then became canon. They weren't canon then; they were just little punk rock kind of group. And some of them had direct connections at various points in their lives to the Florida political scene. And so Andrew Holleran, being a great example, lives close to Gainesville, Florida. In a lot of his fiction, you read undercurrents, which is like spellbinding. He's an amazingly gifted craftsman as a storyteller. His sentence by sentence, amazing writer. You sense the impending paranoia, doom, and also this sort of foreboding concept that the sort of hand of corruption can always swoop in to terrorize your queer joy, and I think that's carried through in a lot of queer art. This idea of thriving, sort of as an FU, in the face of a humorless opposition that would do anything to crush you. Like the notion of being like the dandelion that no matter what grows through the concrete cracks, as I think a sense that permeated so much of queer art from the Red Scare, Lavender Scare, 50s, 60s onward, into where you have very vibrant queer art in the 70s, and then a sort of devastation of the queer art scene in the 80s with the coming of the AIDS crisis. And then after the AIDS, in the second wave of the AIDS crisis, those who just suddenly got their bearings create some of the most amazing art, some of the most amazing works of literature, of nonfiction, of theater, etc., about the AIDS crisis so suddenly. So I think you're right that there tends to be, from this censorship or from this attempt to hold back the tide of queer creativity, then an onslaught that pushes forward. And I think, and I hope, you're giving me faith that there will be an onslaught of queer art, and which is just, going to be tremendous creativity that will contend with and subvert what is happening to all of us right now.
Yeah, and I just went to see a friend's production of King Lear at La Mama in the East Village, and it was a packed house. The vibrant scene of like downtown Manhattan's theater scene is expanding and growing. And I feel like I can even see, and I'm not sure if you're sensing this in New Orleans, but almost like supporting more of that underground scene, the independent artists, and maybe not continuing to support certain bureaucratic, like capitalist models, because, they're not leaving room for or opening doors for, marginalized voices. Is that happening like in New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, we're all getting poorer, but we're all collectively pulling together more so. Like, there is like First Fridays and Third Thursday. There's so many emerging art studios and galleries in New Orleans, and spaces to perform and opportunities to read poetry, etc. It's astounding. And a lot of New Orleans is a magical city that hasn't destroyed its bohemia. There's this long lineage of individuals who are multi-generationally emerging, or maybe never emerging, avant-garde creators. And so that is all there. Community is all there. The sense of pulling together in the face of strife is all there. It's just also acknowledging the injustice of the oppressor and also acknowledging that this pain is real and it's bad.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to the state in America that your book puts a lens on, and the state that has such various opinions about traveling to visiting, which is Florida, and
Sure.
specifically under, Ron DeSantis.
Hmm.
I'm assuming that Ron DeSantis, who actually is Ivy League educated, um, benefited from a Northern education, but then
Hmm.
has really tried to exert power to suppress marginalized groups and their voices. You
Hmm.
know, this is directly out of what you look at with these case studies in McCarthy inspired
Sure.
Florida with the Johns committee that you talk about.
Yeah.
So like what do you see with what's going on now in Florida? Like is this just a continuation of that McCarthyist scare?
Sure. I was feeling at the beginning of 2018 when I was getting interested in the Florida Johns Committee. I was getting a sense that there was this thing I'm just going to call Floridification, or like, why does it seem like um, we're all citizens of this state that we don't actually live in, that the culture of this place, this sort of presidential king and political kingmaker, this massive state by population, fastest growing state actually by population, more than 1,000 people move there every day. It's crazy. Why is it that it all feels like we're part of this domain now? I wanted to know why it was. I got this feeling that, especially with queer and black culture, with civil rights, that Florida is this incubator in our culture wars, and I couldn't understand why. This is even before DeSantis started going at it with the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, the so-called "Don't Stop Woke" Act. I just wanted to delve deeply into it. I thought it preceded Jeb Bush and the sort of anti-gay adoption stuff. Then I realized that anti-gay adoption stuff that lasted into the early 2000s, 2010s, really, that had actually been passed in the era of this anti-homosexual spokesperson named Anita Bryant, who ran the Save Our Children campaign in the
Yeah.
late 70s to try to do away with protections for homosexuals, claiming that homosexuals were trying to groom and corrupt children into our aberrant lifestyle since we can't reproduce biologically. We're like vampires that need to make new ones, basically, and by preying on vulnerable children. Then I realized her ideas weren't original. Actually, her ideas, she was parroting stuff that she learned when she moved to Florida in the early 1960s that had been put forward by this group I'd never heard of before, which was this McCarthy cabal, the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee, run by this Dixiecrat, segregationist, a real tyrant in his era, a corrupt state senator named Charlie Johns, and that what he perpetrated in Florida in those 9 years when he ran this committee was so notorious, the Floridians nicknamed it the Johns Committee. And so I started to learn the tactics and the moves of Charlie Johns politically that he perfected and got away with, that sort of set the standard at the end of segregation for basically what Florida politics was about, especially if you're going to play the whole populist, nationalist, nativist game, which tended to be about never apologizing, looking for constitutional loopholes to crown yourself king, wild gerrymandering, spoils, politics of personal revenge. And when I saw what he had perfected, basically I understood that this man that no one heard of, but that everyone was aping his political style, who basically started the practice of how Florida could be the seat for culture war tidal waves throughout the country, basically created what now is basically a straight line through Anita Bryant in the 70s, through in the 1980s. There were anti-queer Christian conservative amendments, et cetera, that was trying to take away public money from queer groups or queer art. Through Jeb Bush, anti-gay adoption, through Ron DeSantis, I had a trajectory and a lineage that I realized I had been denied to understand what the hell was going on, just as DeSantis was really making hay and really scoring excellent political points, going after queer public arts, rainbow sidewalks, etc. He actually got gone there. AP, African American history, and trans folks. He loved going after that. And anything that makes whites uncomfortable in classrooms with the Stop Woke Act. Any information that might make you uncomfortable. Don't teach slavery. So basically, I felt like I had context now, and I wondered why. And it was like a door of insight opened, and I could just step through and understand this is how and why certain things are happening, and why I feel part of this place that I don't actually live in. Right? That I don't actually, I didn't volunteer to become a citizen of Florida. And so from there, I was wondering, why is this lineage, had it been denied to me? And I realized it's because Charlie Johns was also an early pioneer and perfecter of censorship and redaction. And that as his last acts of moving out of the Johns Committee, when he lost his appropriation in 65, he basically sealed his records, he thought in perpetuity. And then when a state constitutional amendment decades later, about a year after he died actually, made it necessary for that information to become public, the state of Florida redacted the heck out of all of the stuff, chopped it up, made it almost impossible for real researchers to make heads or tails of what he did and what the lineage was. They didn't even know, basically, because that information was destroyed for a while, we didn't know that, in my opinion, we didn't know the world we were living in or the country we were living in or where it came from or who was the progenitor, who was the man that invented some of this stuff. It was a Floridian state senator, a Dixiecrat, corrupt, making money off his own state prison in his own gerrymandered district named Charlie Johns, who basically was the inspiration for so many names now that we do recognize. DeSantis, Trump 2.0, which actually not enough scholarship has been devoted to the psychological effects of him abandoning Trump Tower and turning up in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he was embraced. He was revived. He became more himself. Why? Because he so fit the archetype of a Tallahassee strongman. He even beat out the strongman in Tallahassee. But it still created this phenomenon where, and I'm fascinated by it, where what the two major most important political centers of our country are Washington, D.C., run by a Florida resident, and where none of us asked to live, Tallahassee, Florida. And so that's what fascinated me and drew me to this, where I was like, man, what a lineage denied to the American people, and what would happen if I undid all of the redaction and the censorship that they tried to do? How much insight would I gain into why our country was going the direction it was going? And that's sort of what motivated me to take on this project. And it became this like 4-year long, me sitting over redacted, blacked out documents with magnifying glasses, decensoring stuff, feeling like I was like a code breaker to try to restore this vital piece of American history to the national narrative.
So, like, when you were doing your work, it seems like even now, Florida is a contradiction in the sense that, yes, we have Mar-a-Lago, but we also have a vibrant queer scene in Miami,
You ain't kidding.
Fort Lauderdale, in
Oh
Orlando,
yes, St.
like,
Pete, Key West. Yeah. Forget it, man.
So
Forget
like,
it.
at the same time, DeSantis needs the queer community in order for Florida's economy to survive, right? And that was like the whole issue with Disney when like Disney was kind of threatening that they might move Disney World somewhere else. And
right. One of the largest employers in the state was threatening that because they'd gone from being sort of covert queer friendly to like maybe Elsa singing about gay stuff to like overt. They'd taken the turn.
Yeah. So how, like, what did you learn from this Johns Committee scare and like the censoring and questioning, creating trumped up charges, pun intended, of the Black and queer community that, there are those who, like, I'm assuming also pandered or were, queer and Black like we see now, like a George Santos, where they actually try to curry favor. Like, was that going
Mhm.
on too at the same time?
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia,
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
and we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA plus people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed true crime and severed paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
I learned a lot about you noted like Florida as a state of contradictions. And I noted sort of a ton of why that was happening actually, because the Florida we know is entirely a product of the 20th century, the boom state. It was a rural agricultural backwater in about 1900 or so. The biggest cities were like Jacksonville, which wasn't big, and also Key West, which is still basically about the size that it is now. So all of the growth, all of the boom, Miami becoming the magic city, Tampa and St. Pete becoming this sort of thing on the Gulf Coast, and the Gulf Coast being called the Gold Coast. No one had heard that stuff. Orlando being anything but a big old swampy spot. Anything. It's all a phenomenon of post-World War II growth. Basically, basically that's the advent of air conditioning, the advancement of automobiles, tourism, all sorts of things brought tons of new population to this place that had nothing to do with the southern state of Florida, meaning the part of the old South that was part of the Florida, which was all that northern band from like the Panhandle all the way over to Jacksonville, that straight line. That all culturally had a lot more to do with places like South Carolina and Georgia and Mississippi and things like that. Brutally segregationist regime, incredibly violent, white gangs, white supremacist gangs, etc. Basically, that had a stranglehold on political power. Then, post World War II, all of this growth comes to South Florida. None of these people were born into segregation. They bring new culture and ideas, and they create what's called, in that sort of peninsula area, they settle it, and they create this whole vibrant idea that people call New Florida. And what basically Tallahassee culture did, rather than accommodate this new growth and become a new political state, they decided they were going to latch on to all of their segregated power while denying basically an equal vote to the peninsula, and run this and benefit from the tax revenue of this massively growing state population where so much exciting things was happening. Rockets were going off in Cape Canaveral, and suddenly everyone wants a taste of the frozen concentrated orange juice, and people are figuring out there's manatees in the ocean. What the hell is a manatee? It's like it was this cultural and scientific envy of the world being run by one of the most corrupt, old school governments that ever existed that basically wouldn't even redraw new political lines to elect leaders. So if you lived in North Florida, your vote counted for maybe 5 to 10 more times more than if you lived in South Florida. 20,000 in a random county called Bradford, where Charlie Johns was elected. Basically, 20,000 voters or so elected him to a seat in the state Senate, while in Miami, 500,000 voters voted the same one representative to the state Senate too, and they wouldn't fix it. There was no method using the political process to redistrict or to de-gerrymander to the state, and so it created this logjam of power that still exists in the state. Tallahassee is still the seat of power, or where you go down to Miami, that's a cultural hub. This is, it feels like a Latin American nation in U.S. soil. It's international. It's amazing. It's so unjust. I feel like Miami should have all the power of the state, and it doesn't have any. It's all up in this place. It's all up in this random place that I was the only gay guy ever excited to go to research this book. Where FSU's, there's a couple of things. I don't want to diss people that live in Tallahassee too much, but basically that's been the setup. Is still to this day, where Florida, basically the disenfranchised population in Florida is so massive because the state is so big. It's about 49 maybe to 50, maybe even more percentage of the state. And so that's about, I estimate the equivalent today of about 10 to 11 million people, which is larger or comparable to the entire population of Georgia. And so that's created this phenomenon, but that's all the result of these exponential steps that happened from the 50s to now, where Florida's only gotten more and more important, and where it went from a state in the 1950s or so that had the same electoral votes as Mississippi, nothing, to now kingmaker. The only major state supposedly still an electoral play, although it's gone more and more conservative as time, politically as time goes, and that's because it's a complex population too, and because I'll be real with you, you asked about apologists, because some of the gay retirees that move to Florida, that go to places like Wilton Manors, which is like the gay villages, basically. They don't vote social issues. They vote they vote pocketbook tax issues. So so they don't pay attention to anything else beyond that. But that's like what creates this insane place where there's the same place where this is a state with a bunch of alligators in it, and it's also a state with like the most incredible like state of the art theme parks. And it's a state where in Key West they can basically Key West has been symbolically trying to secede from the Union for years. They call themselves the Conquer Republic, where you can erase the rainbow walkways, and then they're going to build giant rainbow arches as a protest against it. It is a mess. And some people love it, and it's a place of natural wonders in addition to political corruption. Tremendous beauty that none of them like put any effort towards to make the Everglades, to make these beautiful rivers. But still, everyone wants to live there in spite of all the stuff that's happening.
Yeah, well, in May, I went to Miami for the first time and absolutely loved it, and agree with you completely. I think the culture that is there is so rich, so fascinating, but doesn't feel like Florida culture, in the sense of like how people envision Florida. But I also am curious, like, what do you think about, there's a new reality show, I haven't watched it, but it's like Behind the Gates, I think, or something about Palm Beach. I'm not sure if you saw this, and it's all about,
I haven't, no.
It's very like Real Housewives-ish. And
I love it.
Yeah. And even like the Real Housewives of New York women from the original seasons, like almost all of them now live in South Florida, Palm Beach down to Miami. Okay. And a lot of them go to Mar-a-Lago and curry favor, but yet like to flaunt their like gay best friends. And it's like such an odd, like, it seems like DeSantis is even playing this game where like, okay, well, we can't, piss off privileged gay white men, because we rely on them, but we can, like you said, attack the transgender community as a boogeyman.
Right. Or go
Or
after the old segregation phobia against so-called militant blacks. They love doing that.
yes.
And
So why do you think this, um, like, how do these contradictions maybe even parallel, like what I'm thinking about high profile people during McCarthyism, how celebrities, Arthur Miller, even Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe, uh, like had to come out in favor of free speech
mhm.
and like deny that they were communists. It seems very like celebrities are always being told, we don't want to hear about your politics. Like I remember Meryl Streep when she gave that Golden Globe speech about we need to protect the integrity of journalists and the free
Mhm.
speech under this administration.
Right.
And at the same time, it seems like what's going on right now is this president absolutely loves media spectacle and he loves celebrities who,
Sure.
bow down to him like Nicki Minaj right
Thank you.
now, right?
Thank you.
Okay. And it's just such hypocrisy at its finest, in my opinion. Like, how can you, on the one
Sure.
hand, say these celebrities can't speak out and have an opinion, but yet curry favor and use celebrities to boost your own image?
Right. Well, people talk about free speech differently for different people just right now, just like they're talking about gun rights differently for different people, just
Mm.
like they're talking about the need for warrants differently for different people. I know the last time that really happened a lot was when we had an apartheid system in places like Florida that brutally operated where the law applied differently to different people profoundly. Where if you want to look at what racial violence was like in that state, it is ghastly. It's honestly horrific. I've developed an emotional callus for queer oppression through writing several books and pieces of journalism. When you see what happened in Florida on a lynching basis, on when they wouldn't, and when they lynched someone and didn't kill them, they would call it flogging. They just publicly torture them. When you would see what happened to not just black men who were accused of having relations with white women, which was ghastly. If they weren't lynched, they were charged basically with rape in the state of Florida, which was a capital crime. And when you name a year by year on the number of individuals who were executed for the capital crime of rape who were black, you see ages as young as 13 years old. It's very, very horrific. Or when you look at what happened to pregnant black women who were desperate and tried to admit white paternity to try to get some sort of resources, it's ghastly what happened to them. So it's frightening when you think about that there's a sort of walling off and a real establishment again of this concept of first class citizenship and second class citizenship. It was apparent in segregation, right? But it's happening more and more now, where people are angling to try to keep their first class citizenship no matter what by signifying that they align with the regime that can bestow it. So this happens to me now when I'm touring the book. I've done more than 40 events now. Sometimes typically a person, typically a middle class lawyer type, will approach me and say, I don't like what you're doing in this book. I don't care if it's true. What you're doing is negative for the country and divisive, right? And they basically, and shame on you, which is basically another way for them to say they can say shut up to me, and that they're not only the one who can say shut up, but I should listen when they say shut up. So they're saying, basically they're saying I'm the first class citizen and you are the second class gay toy, basically. And then I aligned with you in the heyday years when I could be your ally and you were fun and I was your gay best friend. But those rights we were bestowing, those are trinkets that can be taken away by first classness. And so I love that question when someone poses it to me, because then I'm like, I talk about first class citizenship. I'm like, let's go to the preamble of the Constitution. We the people. It's not just, that means one person, one citizen. That doesn't mean you, the person, and me, the gay toy. We, the people of the United States. In order to form a more perfect union, they're admitting it's not perfect. They're admitting there are various ways that we need to expand the concept of unionship, bring in new groups, create the Bill of Rights, think about what civil rights means, even pass legislation to protect it, etc. They also say to promote justice. Where's justice without truth? How can you say truth doesn't matter? I don't understand. Because it threatens you? Well, that doesn't mean you need to cast it aside. That just means it conflicts with your ideological narrative. And the last one is to ensure domestic tranquility, which means they interpret it as social order. And I love quoting this at someone who I think might be slightly MAGA. I go, there was once a man who said in 2016, either we're a country who has laws or doesn't have laws. Can you have social order without laws? I'm talking about people who broke the law in the 50s and 60s. Are you for that? Are you for random white despots breaking the law in order to harm others? And so anyway, it brings it into a whole thing. But I think we are contending with the fact now that there's basically starting to be, and it's overt, a rank ordering of who's really a citizen for whom the laws can protect but not necessarily apply, and then the rest of us who the laws don't protect necessarily, but who the laws definitely apply to if it's in an opportunistic stance. So they can arrest a journalist like Don Lemon claiming what? I don't know exactly what the charge is, insurrection, trespassing, I mean, like, etc. And but they're not going to arrest. But the January 6ers, they were just performing some sort of free speech function, and we persecuted them, and that wasn't right.
Yeah, or child abusers on the Epstein list.
Oh my gosh.
They're definitely first-class citizens.
And that's an example of redaction, right?
Yeah, I was going to say,
power.
like, how do you weigh in with what you've written and the Epstein files?
That's just redaction power, our redaction nation run amok, where we see now what it's about. Oftentimes, there is no system of checks and balances on redaction within the national security system we've created. And so the redactions seem to consistently protect those in power, but they claim that the redaction is there to protect the victims. But we see victims' names appearing in the Epstein's files all the time. And guess what? Where that also happened? That happened to the Johns Committee files when they released them in the 1990s. They weren't supposed to redact the names of any public official or law enforcement agent. But guess what? Those names were redacted. But where would they occasionally make the mistake? They just dropped their attention where it was a victim that something embarrassing had happened to. And they were putting forth this redaction effort for the Johns Committee, just like the Epstein files, claiming that it's to protect the victims. Why hurt them twice? The state already hurt them in the 50s and 60s. Why hurt them now with this information? This will damage your reputation. So it's lawless. It's utter hypocrisy. I think it flies in the face of First Amendment and also the public's right to know. The public's right to know their own government. I mean, like, the government's supposed to derive from from consent of the governed. And so it's set up this dichotomy where the state presents itself as separate from the populace, which that's a monarchy. I mean, like, that's not what we do. So I see these one-to-ones with the past, with this book and what we're experiencing now, as they're happening at an alarming rate for me, Andrew. I wish it wasn't happening. I didn't think that this book would be so on the nose, and so on the nose to the point where it's either attracting individuals who are incredibly upset and want to come at me, which I actually do like. I like tangling with that, but also people whose main tack is, it doesn't matter if it's true. I'm going to ignore this history to death. I'm going to call this book punditry, wokeist joke, and wokeism at its worst. And I'm going to ignore the fact that this writer, me, spent, I can't even tell you how long, on 100 pages of endnotes. I mean, I nearly had a nervous breakdown documenting and substantiating everything I was putting forward about what it was in this book, because I didn't want you to think that it's just one guy's opinion. This is stuff that occurred, that's verifiable. That's through written documentation. It's not just through some guy saying something. And but yeah, we live in this world where the standards of substantiation for an apolitical figure like me are so high. And then the standards of substantiation for, say, a president that wants to claim he ended, how many wars did he claim he ended today? Very, very low.
Well, and I feel like that nicely, wraps up our conversation, which, I could talk to you forever. You have so
Sure.
much just knowledge, and I so appreciate you coming on, which is when new readers of yours, or audiobook listeners of yours, which you have a great audiobook out there of American Scare,
Thank you.
available on Audible, and probably public libraries too, is what do you really hope your readers get out of your work? Like, is there a certain lesson? Is there just a way to see this through line of what's happening in modern day?
I want them to understand, even at a baseline, you deserve the truth as a citizen, and that the truth is essential, inspiring, invigorating, and there's nothing more important, right? In the journey of you as an individual citizen and fighting for your rights in America, than embracing this truth and knowledge. I think we've been taught to fear it and to think that it's just going to make me feel bad. But why is it going to make you feel bad to learning about these citizens like Martin Luther King, like individuals who stood up and brought down the prior Red Scares and McCarthyism in Florida, and in other states? Basically, you're seeing examples and models of human bravery and of citizens who love the country the way you do. And that's why you deserve a truth like this.
Well, with that, Robert, everyone, please get your hands on American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives. Where can everyone, find you, Robert? I'm assuming you have a website, social media.
I do. You can find me on Instagram. No one can spell my last name, so my Instagram is @wordbobby, WORDBOBBY, and that's the easiest way to reach me.
Great. Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate, you answering every question and just, bringing this work out there, which is, unfortunately timely, but also such important history for us to learn about that has been censored from our curriculum as a country.
I love it. We got to fight the powers that be.
Yes, we do. And with that, bye everyone out there. Make sure, keep researching that uncensored, that history that is uncensored now, but has been censored.